Today, we will be looking at two horrifying caving stories that went horribly wrong. The first one in particular will make your stomach drop, as things take a turn for the worst in a school caving trip. As for the second, it is a tragedy that will leave you breathless as disaster unfolds in the depths. As always, viewer discretion is advised. It was supposed to be an adventure, an outdoor education trip that would challenge and inspire a group of students. But on May 9th, 2023, inside the dark, winding passages of Abbey Caves, what started as a routine school outing turned into a desperate fight for survival. Abbey Caves, located just outside Whangarei in Northland, New Zealand, is a popular destination for adventurers and school groups looking to explore underground rock formations and stunning limestone passages. The caves, including Organ Cave, Middle Cave, and Ivy Cave, are known for their beauty, but also pose significant risks. These caves are largely unregulated and are subject to rapid flooding during heavy rainfall, making them dangerous, especially for inexperienced explorers. The weather had been questionable all week. A thunderstorm warning was in place for Northland, and heavy rain was expected later in the day. Despite this, a group of Year 11 students had successfully completed a caving trip on May 8th, emerging from the caves without issue. Encouraged by that, Whangarei Boys High School pressed ahead with the next group's trip to Organ Cave. The night before, some parents grew uneasy. One emailed the school, asking if the trip was still happening. After receiving confirmation, they chose to keep their son home. Karnan's mother, Alicia Toki, had the same concern. At 8:42 p.m., she sent an email asking if the caves were safe. The school's response came at 9:58 p.m. Yes, it's still on. We are monitoring the weather closely. It looks like the heavy rain will hit around 3 p.m. The students will be out of the caves by 1:30. Reassured, she let Karnan go. At 7:30 a.m. on May 9th, the school checked the weather again. The rain radar showed a storm hovering above Kaitaia, but no new warnings were reviewed for Whangarei. The decision was made. The trip would continue, but only Organ Cave would be explored. By 9 a.m., 17 students, a teacher, and a responsible adult arrived at Abbey Caves. It was lightly raining. The group suited up, overalls, helmets, headlamps, gumboots, and left their phones in the van. Reception was non-existent inside the caves. Between 9:30 and 9:45 a.m., they entered the Organ Cave. Outside the cave, rain pounded Whangarei. Thick gray storm clouds rolled in, turning the sky into an ominous curtain of shifting darkness. Water pooled along roads and sidewalks, rushing into drains already struggling to keep up. Rivers swelled, their surfaces broken by relentless sheets of rain. Andre Petera, Karnan's father, saw the transformation unfold with growing unease. His backyard was turning into a shallow pond. Puddles expanded into pools. He flipped through weather reports, rain warnings, flood risks, storm advisories. The forecast had been wrong. The heavy rain wasn't arriving in the afternoon. It was here now. At 9 a.m., he called the school. "Are they still in the caves?" "It's flooding here." The response was uncertain, the details vague. He hung up, his gut telling him something wasn't right. At 9:40 a.m., he called again. The flooding outside was worse, but he received no answer that reassured him. At 9:50 a.m., he called once more, but the school told him that there's nothing to worry about. Inside Organ Cave, the students had no idea what was happening above ground. They had followed a familiar route along the creek bed, stepping through shallow, crystal-clear water that trickled over smooth rock, each footstep creating gentle ripples. The cave walls, damp and textured, glistened under the glow of their headlamps. The air smelled of earth, moisture, and ancient stone. After moving about 150 meters in, the passage split into two. The students took the upper passage, a section where the cave ceiling arched higher and glowworms clung to the rock. Their blue-green light pulsed faintly, creating an almost surreal beauty in the otherwise pitch-black cavern. For 20 minutes, the group lingered in awe, their voices hushed as they took in the eerie glow. Some students pointed, their helmets casting flickering shadows on the damp rock. The water here had barely reached their knees when they arrived. Then, the teacher noticed something off. The slow-moving trickle of water beneath them was no longer just a trickle. The sound had changed. A low, rushing noise now echoed through the cave. The once gentle flow was building momentum. He crouched down, pressing his hand to the water. It was higher than before. He looked back at the way they had come. The entrance was no longer a distant point of daylight. It was just darkness, the passage behind them swallowed by rising water. "We need to get out, now." The glowworms flickered as boots splashed urgently through the deepening water. The students reached the main tunnel, but the water had transformed. What was knee-high before was now waist-high, and moving fast. The cave had become a funnel, churning with relentless force. The teacher shouted over the noise, "Hold on to each other! Stay together!" The students obeyed, gripping hands and linking arms. The water surged against their bodies, shoving them sideways. It swirled around their legs, tugging, trying to knock them off balance. Then, panic. Several students lost their footing. One slipped under, then another. Their overalls, heavy with water, acted like anchors, pulling them deeper. Gumboots filled up, weighing them down. The students were fighting to stay upright as the water surged through the cave. But Karnan was in the worst possible spot, right in the path of the strongest current. The water had carved out a deep hole in the cave floor, a natural trap. In normal conditions, it might have been harmless, just a depression in the rock where water pooled before spilling into the next passage. But now, with the floodwaters rushing through, it had become a deadly vortex, a sieve sucking anything that entered it into the narrowing crevice beyond. Karnan had been swept toward it. His feet slipped, the current yanking him off balance. He barely had time to react before he dropped into the hole, the water swallowing him up to his chest in an instant. His voice was barely audible over the roar of the water. His classmates watched in horror, frozen for a split second before one of them lunged forward. A student grabbed him, one of the older ones, tried to pull him up. He gripped Karnan's arms, straining against the force of the water. But the current was unrelenting. Karnan was kicking, gasping, twisting against the force of the current. The water wasn't just pulling him downward, it was twisting his body, forcing him sideways, pushing him into the gap between two massive boulders. The student holding him tightened his grip, planting his feet, trying to use his weight to pull Karnan up. Every second that passed, it forced Karnan deeper into the crevice. His overalls had become a weight, dragging him down. The student pulling him was losing his grip. Karnan felt it slipping. The student pulling him was starting to slip too. His knees buckled, the force of the water nearly sweeping him off his feet. For a split second, he tried one last pull, using everything he had left. Karnan gasped as his body shifted slightly upward. But then, a sudden surge. The current grew stronger, ripping Karnan downward again, forcing his body deeper into the crevice. The student lost his grip. Karnan's hands tore free. The last thing anyone saw was his wide, panicked eyes. His mouth open in a silent scream before the water dragged him completely under. For a brief moment, he was still visible beneath the surface, his body twisting, limbs flailing. And then, nothing. He was gone. One student recounts the incident as, "I can't really remember, it was a blur, but I looked away and then I looked back and he was gone." Outside, at 10:35 a.m., the emergency call was made. Emergency responders rushed to Abbey caves, sirens piercing the heavy rain. The 16 surviving students, soaking wet and shivering, stood near the cave entrance, their faces pale, their bodies trembling from the cold and from shock. Some clutched each other, others sat in stunned silence, but one was missing. Police arrived, then search and rescue teams. The water was still too high. Rescuers couldn't enter. The torrent inside the cave was too strong. Karnan's family was at the scene now, watching, waiting for any sign of him. But for hours, there was nothing they could do. By 7 p.m., the floodwaters finally began to recede. The cave entrance, once a thundering river, slowed to a steady rush. Rescuers moved in. They scanned the cave with underwater optical cameras. The feed flickered as the device searched the dark, hidden crevices where the water had forced everything into the rock. Then, they saw him. Karnan's body was pinned against a rock formation. His leg was caught between boulders, locking him in place where the water had funneled him. At 9 p.m., they finally retrieved him. Outside, his family had waited all day. Now, their worst fear was confirmed. This was not just a tragic accident. It was a warning about the power of nature and the cost of underestimating it. The tragedy shocked New Zealand. Investigations revealed that the school had failed to properly assess the risks, despite multiple warnings. In May 2024, WorkSafe New Zealand charged the school's board with exposing students to serious harm or death. By July 2024, they pleaded guilty. The court ordered the school to pay over $500,000 in reparations, acknowledging the devastating impact on Karnan's family and classmates. Karnan Pedra's death was preventable. The Abbey Caves tragedy stands as a haunting reminder. When nature warns you, listen. This next story is a nightmare scenario for a diver, leaving his partner in desperation. It was the 26th of November, 2003, a cool afternoon in Florida, as Jerry Duane Beats, 42, and Kane Overfield, 46, arrived at Little River Spring. Both were experienced cave divers with over 2 years of training and between 15 to 25 previous dives in this very system. Their plan was simple but precise: an 80-minute dive, using scooters to penetrate deep into the cave, turning back when they had used 1/3 of their air. They conducted their final checks, ensuring their double tanks were full, their backup lights were secure, and their guideline reels were ready. A guideline is a thin but strong nylon or polyester cord that cave divers lay down or follow to ensure they can find their way back. Losing the line in a silt out, a condition where disturbed sediment completely obscures visibility, was a nightmare scenario. Once ready, the two divers descended into the spring. At first, the visibility was perfect. Sunlight from above shimmered through the clear water, illuminating the limestone walls as they navigated downward. The entrance quickly funneled them into the main passageway, where the walls grew tighter and the light from the surface faded. At a depth of about 40 feet, they followed the main passage leading into Little River Cave System, one of the more well-traveled dive spots in Florida, but still full of hazards for even seasoned divers. Their scooters hummed softly as they navigated through the narrow corridors, their fins kicking gently to avoid stirring up sediment. The cave walls closed in at times, forcing them to maneuver carefully, then opened into larger rooms, pockets of air trapped in the ceiling from previous divers' exhalations. They made their way past familiar landmarks: the dome room, a large cavernous chamber. The water remained clear, no silt, no hazards. Everything was going to plan. Then they further ventured deep into the cave, reaching the well casing, a vertical passage where the cave narrows before continuing deeper. It was here that Beats suddenly stopped. Overfield, slightly ahead, didn't notice at first. When he looked back, Beats was just hovering, his light fixed on something. Overfield signaled, "Are you okay?" Beats responded with an okay sign, but something felt off. Overfield motioned to continue forward. Beats hesitated but then gave a slow nod. Overfield turned back toward the guideline, accelerating his scooter deeper into the cave. It took him another 200 to 300 feet before he glanced back, realizing Beats was no longer behind him. His heart pounded as he immediately turned back, following the guideline hand over hand, ensuring he didn't let go in case of a silt out. As he neared the well casing, he noticed something wrong. The water was thick with silt. A silt out occurs when fine particles, often clay, sand, or decaying organic matter, get disturbed, turning clear water into an impenetrable, murky fog. In an instant, visibility drops to zero, leaving a diver effectively blind. Overfield hovered carefully, trying to spot his partner's light through the cloud of suspended debris. He reached out cautiously. Then suddenly, he collided with something solid. It was Beats. Overfield instinctively grabbed him, his gloved hand locking onto Beats' arm. A moment of relief. Beats was still there, still moving. He wasn't panicking. But they weren't out of danger yet. Overfield had to secure his scooter. He let go of Beats for just a moment, only long enough to clip his scooter to the line, a safety measure to keep it from drifting away. Then, he reached out for Beats again. Nothing. His hand grasped at empty water. The silt had gotten worse. He waved his arm blindly through the murk, trying to feel for his dive partner. No response, no movement, no light. Beats was gone. Overfield hovered in the murky water, his hand gripping the guideline tightly. The silt out had made visibility zero, and every movement stirred more fine clay into the water, worsening the situation. He had already spent precious minutes searching for Beats, sweeping his arm through the darkness, tapping on his tank, and waiting for a response. Nothing. He tried again, banging his tank 3 times, the universal distress signal. He waited. Still nothing. His air supply was steadily decreasing. The rule of thirds dictated that they should have turned back long ago, and now he was deep into his reserve air. The safest course was to follow the guideline out, but leaving meant abandoning Beats to the cave. He hesitated, straining to hear any sign of movement. If Beats was nearby, if he was on the other side of the silt cloud, moving away blindly, Overfield had no way of knowing. With his air ticking down, he had no choice. Keeping one hand firmly on the line, he started moving deliberately but efficiently, pulling himself hand over hand along the rope, instead of using his scooter to avoid stirring up more silt. The water remained clouded for several feet before finally clearing. As soon as visibility improved, he stopped and turned back, scanning the darkness. He knocked on his tank one last time, waiting, but still got no response. He exhaled slowly, steadying his breathing, then resumed his exit. For Beats, those few seconds of separation created a series of dreadful circumstances. The smallest mistake in a silt out is catastrophic. Disoriented in the darkness, he had lost contact with the guideline. In a cave dive, this is one of the most dangerous scenarios imaginable. Without the line, there's no way to navigate back to safety. He turned, trying to find any familiar shape, but the cave had become an endless void. The more he moved, the more silt he stirred up, making it worse. His breathing grew heavier. His heartbeat pounded in his ears. Then, his scooter failed. The nose and shroud of the scooter had lodged into the soft red clay further down the tunnel, rendering it useless as it was now stuck. With no visibility, no guideline, and no means of propulsion, Beats was now completely alone, drifting in a twisting maze of rock, running out of time. His air supply was depleting rapidly. Every inhalation burned through precious gas, the gauge needle dropping steadily. The stress only made it worse, his body demanding more oxygen as panic crept in. He tried to stay calm, to retrace his path, but in a silt out, everything looked the same, just blackness in every direction. At this depth, surfacing wasn't an option. Without air, he wouldn't even make it halfway back to the entrance. His last hope was finding the guideline or running into Overfield again. He was alone, completely blind and needed to be rescued. At the surface, Overfield waited, banging his tanks, listening, hoping, no sign of Beats. After completing his decompression, he surfaced, expecting to find Beats waiting. Instead, he found nothing. Panic surged through him. He scrambled to the shore, calling for help. Other divers at the spring quickly assembled a rescue team and re-entered the cave. They followed the guideline carefully, past the well casing, through the dome room, and deeper into the system. Then, at the far end of the Florida room, 1,200 feet from the entrance, they saw something. A still figure, floating motionless. Beats. His mouthpiece was out, his regulator hoses dangling loosely. His hands were limp, his eyes half open behind his mask. The divers moved in quickly. One of them tried giving him air, pressing a working regulator into his mouth, hoping against hope that he might still be alive. But unfortunately, they were too late. They clipped his body to the guideline, marking his location, and left the cave. The authorities arrived shortly after, summoning a specialized recovery diver to retrieve the body safely. Overfield's scooter was found clipped to the guideline at the well casing, exactly where he had left it before searching for Beats. Beats' scooter was discovered further inside the cave, nose buried in red clay, abandoned when he became lost. His cause of death was clear: out of air, lost, unable to escape the labyrinth of flooded tunnels before his tanks ran dry. In cave diving, one rule is sacred: always maintain contact with the guideline. A single moment of separation, a few feet of visibility lost, and the cave becomes a trap. For Jerry Beats, one mistake was all it took.